I'm Jess Dakotas.
And I'm Nick Koziel. Welcome to That Sounds Terrifying, the podcast where we share terrifying stories, we share listener experiences, and we visit virtually some of the most haunted places in the United States and the world. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Sounds Terrifying. Today, we are joined with another special guest, Elizabeth Welch, the Fortean Historian. Thanks for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Glad you joined us. Before we get into this, though, I do need to take a minute and ask, Nick, did you shave your head?
Yes. It's all gone, Jess.
Oh my God, you shaved your head.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You're like the
When did you do that?
second non-family member to see it. I did it for my daughter's birthday.
Oh, okay.
So
Was that like what she asked for?
kind of, but not really. Like she always preferred me with shorter hair, and she had said something, and it was kind of time anyway. So I had really Elizabeth, I had really long hair for quite some time. And yeah, it was time for a change. So thanks for noticing,
great.
Jess. Thank you.
Yeah.
The clean look.
Nice.
It's the Mr. Clean Nick. Just to be a little bit more terrifying, you know.
I think it looks great.
Thanks.
So, Elizabeth,
Yes.
thank you for joining us. Let's get into it. You have some short stories. What am I trying to say? Do you have some stories to tell us?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm a paranormal investigator. I've been a paranormal investigator professionally for about 6 years. And I got into paranormal investigation kind of how most people do, and that's growing up in a haunted house. So I can share that story if you'd like.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Basically, from the time I was born to 9 years old, we lived in one house, and we had to move. And really, we didn't move very far. We really just moved down the road, basically. And we moved to a split level home, kind of like Brady Bunch style. That's how I describe it, just so you guys can understand the layout. It was built in the 70s, and we moved in 1999. I was around 9, 10 years old when we moved in. No one had died on this property. Now, I found that out later, or at least when the house was built, in the house. And my mom had experiences. She has a story that's even more frightening than this, but she really didn't share any paranormal things with us. So I didn't really know too much ghost stuff, just by the time I was 9 or 10. So when the things happen, when they happen, at first I had no idea what was going on. And I had to kind of research myself what was going on. So basically, the first things that started happening at our house, we started smelling cigar smoke, and not cigarette smoke, like cigar smoke, tobacco. And again, that could be blamed for a lot of reasons. We were redecorating the house, we were renovating it, and smoke gets trapped behind in weird areas, carpet, So again, that could be explainable. However, that phenomenon continues to this day. And by the way, my parents still live in this house. But anyway, so the first big incident that happens, I was 9 or 10 years old. We just moved in, and this may sound silly to some of the viewers, but me and my sister used to go camping in our living room, and really all it was having a sleeping bag, out on the floor, watch a movie, and then we go to sleep. Right. It was just
Mhm.
that was our camping.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a tradition we did every weekend. So once we were finally settled in and moved into this new house, we settled in, and we did a camping experience. And at one point, we start hearing knocking on the walls. And at first, I'm thinking it's my sister and that she's doing all this knocking. And then she thinks it's me. And we realize it's not us. Around that time that we both finally realize it's not each other, the kitchen was visible in the room. You could look into the kitchen from the living room. And we noticed that all the cabinet doors had been open, and right in front of us, they all slammed shut. And even as an investigator, I've still never seen something like that. To this
Jeez.
day, I've still never seen anything like that. Well, we hightail it upstairs, immediately screaming. And our parents were, you made this up. They were like, go back to bed, go to your room, right? And they didn't want to hear it. They were just aggravated because it was really late. And we never had a camping experience ever again, or at least in that way.
Mhm.
Living room. And that kind of ended that family tradition. So fast forward a couple of years, and during this time, I should say, it's not like nothing's happening. We were hearing footsteps going up and down the stairs. Our animals, we had lots of pets, they would react to something in the room. And by this point, I'd already kind of like, okay, this has to be a ghost, right? And my dad was a non-believer. My mom believed, but she just, due to her own experiences, just wanted to be like, squash it, shove it under
Mhm.
the rug, right? It's not happening. The next big experience that happens, I was in middle school and I had moved into a separate room. So I used to share a bunk bed with my sister. And then I finally was old enough that I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to have my own room. And so I took the guest bedroom, and I fixed it up myself. And it was like the third or fourth night. Like, this wasn't the first night, but I was starting to drift off to sleep. And something grabbed my hair like this and pulled my head up and slammed my head back into the pillow.
Jeez.
Now, my sister and I were kind of close in age, and we fought like wildcats all the time. So immediately I get up swinging.
Yeah.
And I think it's my sister. So I immediately think it's her. And I scream out her name, and I turn on the lamp, and nothing's there. And this is going to be a phenomenon that repeats itself in this house, that it would get so quiet your ears would ring. And it was kind of that happening, but I was so mad. Like, I could feel like the blood in my head. Like, I was so mad. And I wasn't thinking. I was a middle schooler. And I'm getting up out of bed, going to the door. Meanwhile, no one had run to the door. No one had run down the hall to her bedroom. None of this noise had
Mhm.
occurred that would make sense, right? If it was her. And it was about halfway down the hallway that I was like, oh no. Like, how could she have done this? The door didn't even open. You couldn't have closed it without not, hearing something. But I still went. I was like, let me check. And she was sound asleep, and she couldn't fake sleeping. So she was sound asleep. And crazily, I'm like, was it my parents? So I peeked on them. They were asleep. Like, why would they do
Yeah.
that? And it was at that point I knew. I was like, oh gosh. And I walked back into that room, and which was so terrifying for me. And the
Yeah.
room was
Mhm.
ice cold. Ice cold. And that's when I started to pretty much grab any ghost book, any paranormal books, whatever. I got into UFOs, cryptids, everything. At this point, as a kid, I just was like, I need to read it all. I need to consume all the content on this because I need to understand what's happening.
Mhm.
And it was actually through reading one of those books that I made, I don't want to say a deal with it, but I said, okay, you can never touch me again. I don't want to, I think I said, I don't want to see you and I don't want you to touch me, but you can stay here. Just, leave me alone. And I never did see it, and I never got touched again.
Mhm.
But other things happened. So, again, activity continued. A big thing would be hearing footsteps going up the stairs and then them just disappearing. And it doesn't make sense because, again, no one died in this house. Later, I find out. And to this day, I don't know. I guess whatever spirits were there figured out the layout of the house and figured things out. It boggles my mind even to this day, but I guess that's what happened. Fast forward, I'll just focus on the major events. So I think I was about 16. I was in marching band, and we had summer day band camps. And by the way, this is all taking place in South Carolina. That's important to mention for later. And basically, I got home, and of course, I was hot and sweaty. I needed to take a shower. And my parents were like, okay, cool. We're going to go get groceries. We're going to go to the grocery store. We'll be back in about an hour. Right. And they took my sister. I was like, okay, cool. This had happened dozens of times. No problem. And I, get in the shower. I just put shampoo in my hair. And all of a sudden at the door of the bathroom, I hear bam, bam, bam. So my dad had a tendency, he hated us taking too long in the shower, wasting hot water. He was always checking the thermostat, we couldn't change anything. He's that type of person. Checking the energy meter. So honestly, I was like, oh, in my mind, I'm like, they came back and he's here, or they haven't quite left yet or something. And I got really angry. I was like, I just got in the shower. And so I quickly finished shampooing my hair, conditioning, and all that, got out of the shower, got dressed. And I'm angry. I'm ready to have this confrontation because I was 16 and I fought with my dad a lot, but I'm ready for this confrontation. And once again, I open the door and the air is ice cold once again. And again, I could hear the ringing in my ear just because it was so silent. The cats that we had were hiding. Our dog, we had a golden retriever who she went into her crate. She was in her crate and she was just kind of curled up like, and there was no noise in the house. And I immediately knew, I was like, oh no. So I ended up staying outside for a whole hour in the heat, waiting for them, because this was summertime in South Carolina, and waiting for them to come home. And after that, I very rarely stayed at home by myself. I did not like to do that. I tried not to as much as possible. The next year, I was dating this guy, and this is going to date me because we had a family computer and YouTube was brand new. So, today we go on TikTok, right, and scroll through videos and
yeah, well, we didn't have phones then either.
Yeah.
We had it was a flip phone. There was nothing on it.
Yes. And back then we had to wait 5 minutes for one video to upload and to load up so you could play it. And then we laugh. And that's what we were doing. My parents were upstairs. My sister, she was not home. I don't remember what she was doing. And we were in the living room and we were watching YouTube videos. And again, it would take so long to load up and then watch, a minute of a video. Kids don't know how good they have it. But anyway, so we're laughing and I don't remember the video at all. And behind us in the kitchen, I hear a woman go, ha, 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 just like that. To this day, that's exactly how it sounded. And I turn and he whips his head around and he goes, who is that? And finally, I was like, yes, finally someone else outside, because I told people like, hey, my house is haunted, and they're like, you're crazy. And my dad would be like, you're crazy. My dad didn't have an experience till many years later. And I was talking about the thermostat. It was we had a manual thermostat where you like move the top.
Yeah, the slider, yeah.
Yeah, and something had moved it all the way to like 50 degrees or something crazy. And that's the only experience he's had.
It had it out for your dad,
Yeah.
though.
He was the only one in the house because he would blame us, and evidently it had been moved many times. And for some reason, my mom had gone on an overnight trip or somewhere or something, and he was the only one home alone. And that was after we'd moved out, or you know, myself, my sister was in college, so that happened to him. But finally, there was an outsider. He was like, that had to be somebody. And you know, our back door is right there, so he's looking out the back door. There's no one around, no one around. And so finally I had that validation. So I go off to college, and partly due to my fascination with the paranormal, from reading ghost stories all the time, I became obsessed with history as well. Loved history. And so I majored in history in college. And when I went off to college, I finally had resources. Now, today, it's a lot easier online to look up property history. But back then in the 2000s, it wasn't that easy. So using my college resources, I was able to like research my house's history. And it had been built on a former plantation that had enslaved people. And in fact, the enslaved quarters were, if you looked at an overlay map, they would have been in the street in front of our house. So like roughly lined up. And I don't know if there's any connection there with that. But again, my parents still live there. Fast forward again, there is a conclusion to this story that kind of, it's one of those situations where you have more questions than answers. But my son was born, and around the time he was about 5-6 months old, we went down to South Carolina because we were living up here in Virginia at this point. We go back down to South Carolina to visit, and we had a good visit. We go back home, and 3 days later, my mom calls, and she's like, you won't believe what just happened. And I'm like, what happened? And she's said, we heard your son babbling in your room. And that's where, you know, we kept his cot and pack and play, basically, for where he'd take naps and stuff while we were visiting. And I was like, what do you mean? And then I was like thinking, well, we leave a toy behind? You know, and she was like, I actually thought it was a toy at first. And your sister was here. And we were at the bottom of the stairs, and we heard him babbling and talking, or like for a baby, you know, babbling. And we walked in, and the room was cold, and there was nothing in there, and y'all didn't leave anything behind. So that freaks me out, because now whatever it is mimicked my son, right? And to kind of add a follow-up finally to all of this, so my dad does genealogy. He's an amateur genealogist. And so I'm an amateur genealogist as well. I look into our family history. I was looking on my mom's side of the family, and I recognized the last name, and the same last name. To be honest, it's somewhat common. And I won't say just for privacy reasons, but it's the same last name as the plantation family that had that plantation. And I was like, well, this is up somewhere else. And it turns out that my ancestor was the brother to the guy who built that house. So he would have been my great, 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 whatever, great, lots of greats, uncle. Uncle. And that family was related. It's just like one brother went off to North Carolina and then Kentucky, and then this brother just went to South Carolina and started that plantation there. So I don't know if that's why we had things happen. None of the neighbors, my mom went later and asked neighbors, they've never had things happen. We don't know why.
No.
So like I said, there's more questions than answers, unfortunately. But
Well,
it could be connected. I have no clue.
it's a crazy
Was
story though.
Yeah, was there did you live like was it suburban at this point?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So definitely
Like next door.
suburbs. The house was there. It was run down, and now there's actually another a person has renovated the house, and they're using it for events now. And so I'm so curious. I would love to get into that house and investigate.
I was going to ask that
That sounds
question. Did
But
fun.
you ever investigate it?
no, not the plantation house. And my parents refused to let me investigate their house because they don't want activity to be stirred up more than it
Yeah.
already is.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since they still live there.
So I mean outside of so was that the most recent thing? Your son visiting or
Yes. So my mom still, she still has experiences. And that's the other thing I should have included was after I left home, my sister, I feel very bad. She started getting more experiences, and so did my mom. My mom started getting a lot more experiences after I left. So she believed us. She still doesn't like to talk about it though.
right.
And that's including with her own story, which is freaky that she
Mhm.
has. But she she's not a big fan of the paranormal, and my sister's not too much either. I think they both tolerate like whenever I talk about it, but they'd rather I not. So whereas this caused me to gravitate towards all things paranormal, for them it's the opposite.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
stirs your
Started.
soul a little bit and it is scary when when you have that kind of fear, and fear only feeds. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you were the target though for most of your life there. Like it
Yeah.
was really targeting you.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure why. Because I wasn't into anything paranormal before this. I was only like 9 years old. So I'm not sure. I don't know if I was more sensitive, and that could be why. I mean, I downplay it on our team, but I think me and another team member were a little bit more sensitive. Like we can feel like when things change, but I would never call myself a medium. I would never call myself psychic. I don't
Yeah.
have any of those kinds of abilities, but like we can feel when like the atmosphere is charged, when something's about to happen, something's about to go down, things like that, or heaviness in the air. But as a kid, prior to this, I'd really not had any paranormal experiences except for I did have a dream when I was like 2 years old where I was in a cafe and it was all in black and white, and I was eating at this cafe and people were wearing clothes from the 1940s, and it was just kind of a weird dream. I don't know if it's a past life dream. I know
Past
we were
life.
kind of talking
Yeah.
about that before we
Yeah.
started. That's the only other weird thing that I had happen prior to moving to that house. So I'm
Well, it's
not sure.
interesting because maybe like we've talked a little bit about, energy being fed into things, and when the spirit sort of was able to connect and you were able to witness something,
Mhm.
it probably concentrated on you because you were acknowledging it, right, in some
Yeah,
way, right? So
both me and my
whereas,
sister. Yeah.
you know and then your dad, has he become like kind of more a believer, or is he just like strange things are happening, I can't quite explain it, but whatever? I was just
Kind of
curious.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The latter. He kind of like, I just don't want to think about or deal with it.
Mhm.
That's kind of his thing. Like I said, he tolerates it, but he often, when my mom or me would talk about things, or my sister, he'd roll his eyes like whatever.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
Well, he
keep
was
thinking
scared
about.
enough to
Yeah.
tell someone about the thermostat going
Yeah.
down to
yeah, that went too far for him.
Yeah.
yeah.
I
That
keep
got
He
his
thinking
told
of
attention.
somebody.
I keep thinking of Peter
Leave him
Griffin. Who
alone.
touched the thermostat?
Yeah.
We have a thing. We've got a thing here, Meg.
I think it's interesting though that as soon as you moved in and you were doing the camping thing in your living room, it showed you, it was like, look what I can do, is
Oh
what
Mhm.
it was,
yeah, yeah,
like kind of saying, like, look what I can do. Like, I'm
Mhm.
powerful. Like, I can open your cabinets and I can shut them. It's poltergeist stuff, you
yeah.
know?
Right.
And
And
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, you're fine. I was just gonna say, like, you were preteens, 9.
Yeah,
That's a tween, you know?
yeah.
And so like just maybe using your energy, like that child energy to like
Mhm.
do things. I find that
So
interesting.
later, I read a lot of paranormal theories, and where young women, teenagers, preteens supposedly can, I've had people suggest maybe it was myself haunting the place because, like, maybe both me and my sister were somehow energizing the place, and
Mhm.
or we were giving it energy. Again, I'm not so. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm open to anything. Um, I've had people just try to come up with all sorts of different explanations, like, well, what happened. But that's always an interesting theory to me, that young women tend to be like conduits, I guess,
Mhm.
for
Well, you
paranormal
said,
activity.
yeah, you said like you were always wildcats too. So it seems like you had a lot of energy going about, and
Yeah.
we talk a lot about energy on this show, and
We do.
how it can help manifest different things or be stored in certain ways. And but I don't know, like I'm not a expert. I just feel like it was something more than just you making it happen, kind of a thing. There's a little bit of an intelligence around it, and a little bit of targeting almost on you. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Well, that negativity, I mean, the negativity of the land itself probably, it does, land holds
yeah.
energy,
So
so
interestingly enough, our paranormal team, so I'm part of a team called Chesapeake Paranormal in
Mhm.
the Northern Virginia, Maryland area.
Mm.
And we went to, I won't say the location because it was a private location, but we went to a home that had been built in 2010. And it had also been built on a former enslaved plantation, right?
Mhm.
And they had a family member die in the house, and that's who they kind of assumed. But they were getting so much activity, and the child had seen a different spirit, and we ended up doing the history of that home. And like I said, same situation, another plantation. What was interesting about that was that the neighbors also had activity too, and they saw the same spirit um in the different houses. And we got a lot of evidence that came from that house. In fact, they they are busy 24/7, and I think that's kind of a good thing. um like, there's people in the house that work night shift, there's people who are day shift, and the kids are like teenagers now, and they say there's music constantly playing, and part of it is to distract themselves from what's
Mhm.
happening.
Mhm.
It's kind of a
Yeah.
good thing, because as soon as they shut the house down, it was pretty wild and crazy activity. And we all as a team were like, I couldn't imagine living in this house, but it
Yeah.
reminded me of my own house, and some of the experiences they had had very similar.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if the land is cursed. I mean, it would make sense for it to be cursed, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was. And I don't know if we were targeted because we were descendants, or we weren't
Mhm.
direct descendants, but related.
Yeah. Well,
You
it's
Close
in the
enough.
yeah, it's in the blood, it's
Yeah.
in the history, and like
Yeah.
a lot of
I
bad
don't
things
blame them
happened
for
on
something.
plantations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, something interesting about that is that so I've talked about it before on the podcast, but I'm a realtor. And homes, people don't realize that homes hold energy.
Mhm.
Homes themselves, and this is what I believe, but it just keeps kind of showing itself every time. Homes can hold energy. We live here, we work here, we expend our energy here. We're sometimes
Yes.
the most sad here, we're the most happy here, we're the most angry here. It's home.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
everybody is free to be themselves and feel all their own energy in a home. And time and time again, when I have a closing and the new owners take possession of a house, the house will inevitably have something, or
Yes.
right before they take possession, the house, like just yesterday, I had a house that was closing, and the new owners are supposed to take possession today. Their air conditioning, they have a brand new HVAC, went on a 90-degree day, like gone. Just because the house is, to me, I call it like it's a sad house, like they miss the energy of the old
Yeah.
owner, or they're excited for the new owner, or whatever. Like that, to me, like houses have like their own feeling, their own personality, their own just,
Mhm.
vibe. But I mean, I sold a different house, and as soon as the new owners took possession, somebody told me later, much later on, that their entire HVAC broke and their electrical panel fried.
Oh gosh, that
The
sounds like
house
this.
is like,
Yeah.
yeah, and to me, it's like the house sighing, like,
Right.
oh God, I don't know.
Expensive though.
Yeah.
It's expensive, yes. Or like, the sewage pipe will back up and this
Yeah.
and that. And like, but like it's every time of change that these things are happening. Not to say that these things don't happen, just on
Mhm.
an everyday, level, but it just seems like they're happening, you know, very frequently at time of
I
change.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Well, I guess, yeah, when you think about it, at times of change, that's when the most energy is exchanging, right? So,
Yeah.
but super interesting. You made me think kind of a funny, but it's also sort of creepy, scary story from my childhood. I used to stay over a friend's house, and you know how you have the little sibling who always wants to be kind of involved with the older kids
Yes.
and will leave you alone, and the brother or whatever sister is always
Yeah.
annoyed, right? So this friend, like he had bunk beds, and I got like on the top bunk. His little brother was normally up there, and so he kept like coming in and bothering us, and so my friend was getting mad. Um, and so we finally like told mom,
Yeah.
that's it, it's over now. We told
Yeah.
mom, so in the middle of the night, we had been sleeping and we finally went to sleep. I hear my friend go, yell some like, curse, and then jump up, and like he's gonna like get his brother or whatever. And then I heard this loud bang and then silence. And then
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
are you okay? What's going on? Nothing. He had felt something touch him, thought it was his brother, jumped up, hit his head on the top
Oh
of the bunk,
no.
and knocked himself out.
Oh no.
And it took a little while because I kept on asking, "Are you okay?" or "Okay," and then I heard him like moaning and stuff. So we ended up getting his like parents and all that stuff. But after all of that, he swears that something grabbed him, but his brother was sound asleep in the other room, and it was definitely
Yeah.
not his brother. But like
That,
he's never had any stories of hauntings or anything. It could have just been like the blanket falling or whatever. But you just made
yeah.
me think of that with the sleepovers, because my kids do that all the time. Like now, like they go and camp out in the living room and watch a movie, and then
Yeah.
sleep out there. And um it just made me think of childhood, and
Yeah.
like someone grabbing somebody and getting mad and throwing a punch. He threw with his head, I guess, and knocked himself out. But
Oh gosh.
Well, that'd
so
be a lesson to him, not
yeah,
headbutt his little brother.
yeah.
Well,
But
I do have another story about my
yeah, let's hear
mom.
it.
Would y'all want to hear that one?
Oh
Okay.
yes.
No, I'm
This
afraid
one's
we're gonna just stop. No, that's be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
this one is 10 times more terrifying in my opinion. Now,
Mhm.
I did not experience this. This was my mom's own story.
Mhm.
Um, so my mom grew up in Eastern Kentucky. Her father was a coal miner. So yeah, the whole coal miner's daughter thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was just thinking it in my head.
she was the youngest of 5 kids. She was kind of the oops baby. So her brothers were much older than she was. And she was the only girl. So this story, again, more questions than answers. It's kind of, again, one of those situations. And knock on wood that I never faced something like this. But basically her father had a dream. So my mom was born in the mid-50s. And so about 2 years after my mom was born, he had a dream that something was chasing him in the coal mine. And it was this dark, black, shadowy figure. And then that it caught him. Now this was relayed to my mom by her mom, my grandmother. And a few days later, he was involved in an accident. So it's very important to kind of note for this whole story, he worked at a non-union mine. And he'd worked there for many years, but they had wanted him to work on a new machine. And the way that, I could be wrong, but basically you hold it and you push it into the wall, right, to help dig out some of the coal. Something like that. And someone had called to him, and he turned and it sucked in his arm to his shoulder and chest cavity.
Oh.
And he survived that. He survived that part. They took him to the hospital. He stayed a while in the hospital. He lost his arm. And he was able to go home, but then he started deteriorating. He was sent back to the hospital. He had pneumonia and he died.
Oh.
And because technically he died of pneumonia, the coal company was like, y'all are on your own. We're at no fault here. Yeah. So my grandmother was now a single mother to, well, I think the older two had moved out, but at least 3 kids, right? And had to take care of them. So she had to get multiple jobs, basically, to support the kids. The first thing that happens is, and they lived in a mill house. She continued living there. And there had been no activity before my grandfather's death. So that's also important to know. She came home from one work shift, and I think she was about to go to another, and I could be telling that part wrong, but she was coming home, and none of the kids were at home. And there were 2 neighbors' children playing out in the front yard, which was common, normal. And they go, oh, and I'll leave out names. I'll just say Mr. So-and-so, who is her husband, who had passed away. But they go, oh, Miss So-and-so, we saw Mr. So-and-so walk into the house, come down the road and walk into the house. And this was still the late 50s at this point. And back then, you could kind of get angry at other people's kids and be like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of did that. And they're like, we're not lying. We saw Mr. So-and-so walk down the road in a suit, which, that'd be like Sunday best, and walk into the house. And so she freaked out, and she's not thinking it's her dead husband at all. She's thinking that there's a burglar. She went over to the neighbors. She called the police. They came over. They searched the whole house, and no one was in the house. So moving on, just to kind of tell you the layout of this house, it was a small mill house, and there was a kitchen, living room, and they were lucky they had an indoor bathroom. And upstairs they had 2 bedrooms, and that was it. It was a small house. And the stairs, it's very important to note, they didn't have a landing. They were just straight down. These stairs were like 10 steps straight down. And my mom slept downstairs with her mom, and her 2 older brothers that were still living in the house would sleep in the rooms upstairs. Now fast forward to the mid 60s. My mom's about 10 years old, and one of her brothers has moved out, so she can finally have a room. And she basically is decorating her room, how she wants it. And this is kind of unusual for modern people to understand, but I guess it was a tradition back then. But there was a chest in the room, and inside that chest, there were ribbons, and the ribbons were from her dad's funeral when she was only 2 years old. That happened. And the ribbons had embossing on it. So they wrote messages on it in like gold gilt I don't know, but they kept the ribbons. My grandma kept the ribbons, and I've had people like, that's morbid, and I'm like, I don't know why they kept the ribbons from the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was playing with the ribbons as like a 10-year-old girl, and looking at them. And again, this is according to her. The chest was on one side of the room and the door was behind her. And from behind her, she hears a zip noise. And that's how she describes it. And she turned around and she sees a foggy, misty, Grim Reaper looking figure in the doorway. Like it had a hood. She describes it like the Ghost of Christmas Future, right? And the Charles Dickens story. And like it was black as black could be, like, you know, like no light going in. And at the same time, the outer parts of it were kind of misty and it was floating there. And she said she wasn't really shocked. She was terrified, but she insists on this, that it wasn't, she was frozen terrified. She tried to immediately move as soon as she saw it. She was like, heck no. She tried to move, but something was holding her in place and would not let go of her. And she describes it like that. She was like, it's not, I wasn't too scared to move. It was like, I couldn't move.
Yeah.
And she said it felt like minutes, but it was probably only seconds. Her looking at it looking at her, and then it started floating towards her. As soon as it started floating towards her, she could move. And she was like, I'm done with this. And she got out of the room. She ran around it, and she got to the top of the stairs. Now, she is a 10-year-old kid, not using common sense. She's terrified. And so she decides to jump off the stairs, from the top of the stairs, full run.
Wow.
Because she just wants to get down at like as quick as possible. And this is according to her. I've had people go, no way, no way. She said something stopped her in midair, straightened her up, and then floated her down the steps and set her gently down. I know.
That is,
I know. And even when she told me that, I was like, no, that didn't happen. She was like, that happened. I don't, you know. So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to interrupt you right there. That is common. That is a common thing that little children say. If you look it up and you research floating down the stairs, there are so many stories of children who say that something grabbed them midair as they were about to fall down the stairs, and it just floats them gently down and places them there. I don't know what it is, but that is a very common thing. It's so interesting. Angel. So it could be, you don't know. Sorry, continue.
And we have a theory about that just a bit, but so once it set her down, she went screaming for her mom, and my grandma was like, what? What do you want? And you know, it took several minutes of her trying to explain what happened because she was so terrified. So finally her mom, my grandmother, went to the base of the steps. And my mom was hiding behind her dress, like, like absolutely not. You know, she didn't want to end. And my grandma goes, "Look, there's nothing there." And my mom peeked around, and that Grim Reaper figure was looking down the stairs at her. And she like, that was it. That was over. She never went upstairs again. I think one of her brothers had to bring all of her stuff back down. She stayed, as long as they lived in that house, she stayed with my grandmother on that bottom floor. So I'm not sure what time of year that happened, but in the same year, fast forward to Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving, everybody's back, and my grandma decided to embarrass her and started laughing about the story that my mom went through. Like, oh, you won't believe this, like what she's saying, you know, that this crazy thing happened. And one of my uncles got very quiet after the whole story was said and said, well, I guess it's back. And that causes this huge pandemonium at the table. And this is 1965, and everyone's like, what do you mean it's back? What are you talking about? Well, evidently my uncle, he kind of was up to no good at this point in his life. He got into a lot of trouble. And one thing that was in that chest was an ivory handled handgun. And my uncle, I think one day just decided he was going to take that ivory handled gun. And it had been his father, so my grandfather, it had been his gun. And he had gone to that chest. And this was after his grandfather passed away, but sometime before. So I don't know exactly when it happened, unfortunately, but sometime before my mom's incident. And I guess he was playing with it, looking for bullets, and he heard the exact same thing behind him in the same room. And he sees the exact same thing that's there. And instead of what happened to my mom, it zoomed forward to his face, and he was a teenager to a young man when this happened. And it grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. Again, this is their story. This is not, I know it's wild. It's a crazy story. And he dropped it, and at some point it just faded away. That's what it did. And so he immediately just put the gun back, he put it under everything, left, never bothered it. And supposedly he straightened himself out after that too.
Scared straight.
Yeah, I think he joined the military. So
I'll do it.
And of course at that point, now the whole table, everyone's freaking out because they were religious, and this was upsetting to them. And they were like, what do we do? What do we do about this? And there was just kind of this panic. And evidently there was a back and forth, not necessarily at that dinner, but for the next couple of years, of what should we do at this house? Because evidently my grandmother finally, after that dinner, had an experience, and she never told anyone other than she had an experience, and she would not tell anyone what it was and what happened. So we don't know. She took that to her grave. And at that point, she wanted to sell the house, but she felt guilty about just selling the house to anyone. And she was like, should we get it blessed? And there was this back and forth. And I asked my mom, because they were like, she talked about this famous couple that would come around and do ghost hunting and like try to, and I was like, was she talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren? She was like, I have no idea if she was talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren. But they were kind of active at that time, but they were thinking about bringing somebody in, but then they were terrified because if word got out, one, they would be all deemed as crazy because this was the 60s. And also no one would buy the house. And in the end, they just ended up selling the house. And we don't know if anybody ended up having any experiences in that house after. They ended up moving to Lexington, Kentucky. So that's not exactly the ending. Fast forward to the 80s, and my mom was living with her mother. By this point, my grandmother was older, and she'd never learned to drive a car. So my mom was responsible taking her to doctor's appointments, things like that. And my mom had a dream that she was going to take her mom to a doctor's appointment, and she's picking up her mother, and they're going to the car, and my mom almost gets in the car, but in the driver's seat is that Grim Reaper figure, that thing in the dream. So she starts screaming, and her mom's about to get in the car, and so she runs around the car, and she said it was the most realistic dream she ever had. Like, she could feel everything, and she grabs her mom, and she's like, you can't get in the car, you can't get in the car. And her mom is arguing back and forth with her, like, why can't I get in the car? And I don't see anything, and all this, the same thing. And evidently my mom in the dream grabbed my grandma's head, forced her to look, and was like, look, and she was like, oh, and then woke up. And my mom woke up. So she saw it. A couple of days later, my grandmother had a massive heart attack and almost died. And my mom is still convinced to this day, had she gone into that car, had she, let her go in that car, she would not have made it. Now, my grandmother did pass away in the early 90s, but my mom did not have that dream. She did not have that
Right.
thing, you know, any kind of experience before that. And that's where, knock on wood, it hopefully ends. I hope I never experience it. It kind of scares me. It's always in the back of my head
Mhm.
about this
Yeah.
figure.
Yeah, it does sound terrifying.
And she's never dreamt of it again, never seen it again, even though our house had experiences, or the house that I grew up in had experiences. She does not like to talk about this at all. Like, I have her permission to talk about it, but she won't repeat the story. She's only talked about it fully about twice to me.
Mhm.
Wow.
And she just does not want to have anything to do with it because it terrified her. And, you know, in her words, she blames it for killing her father and almost killing her mother. And that's kind of the confusion we have, because she's gone back and forth to thinking it wasn't her dad, but then maybe it was her dad, because especially with her brother's situation, she felt like that it was trying to knock some sense into him. Like, hey, you're doing stupid things, you know?
Yeah.
And so for a while she thought it was her dad, but she's not sure. I think, I don't know what it was, but whatever, you know, set her down the stairs, I think that may have been her dad. But
Mhm.
I don't know that that was the Grim Reaper thing.
Well, maybe,
Mhm.
maybe it's something you brought home.
Apparition of her dad before. So again, that's just the whole story altogether. We don't really know what it was, what it is, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah. It sounds like a harbinger. Like
Yes.
it, you know, like
Mhm.
because your grandpa had that dream
Yes.
before he as my light goes out, before he died, you know, and like maybe it was a warning. My goodness. Maybe it was a warning saying that like you know, don't go to work or something, but he just
Yeah.
didn't get it,
Yeah.
you
It
know, or
caught,
watch out or be careful.
the one distinction is it caught him in the dream. And
Mm.
like my grandmother in that dream, with my mom's dream, it was my mom's dream, almost got in the car with it, but
Mhm.
didn't. So you're right. I don't know. But again, my mom had the experience, you know, playing with the ribbon. So I don't know if it's a full, it acts as a harbinger, definitely. But again, and before my grandfather's death, it did not, there was no history of this thing in the family. There was nothing, you know.
So that's what I was kind of saying. Maybe it was
Yeah.
something, you know, you dig in the depths of a mine, and maybe you brought something home from that, right? And
Oh,
then
that, you just gave me chills.
I like
sorry.
I never
that.
really thought about that. And as soon as you started saying it, it just hit me too.
Yeah.
I don't
Um,
know. That's a good idea. I have no clue.
yeah.
I
Well, it's
don't know if
very
I
sort
want to
of
tell
Lord of the
my mom keeps
Rings
talking
kind
about
of.
it, but
Yeah.
I'm curious to bring that up to her.
Yeah.
That's,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. I mean,
Yeah.
all those stories, and I know that you still have like things about like you've investigated, and
Yeah.
you sent us some like, you know, video evidence and stuff on some of those investigations. Um, so I think this is another episode that we're gonna have to go into, because I don't
You
want to
need a
like,
part two.
yeah, we
Yeah.
need a part two.
Sure.
But I think for this particular thing right now, everything that you've shared has just been like, you know, it's terrifying. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like the show. So thanks for helping
Yeah.
us to live up to our name here. But
Sure.
I think it is about about that time, right, Jess?
Yeah.
It is. Gosh, I love this though. Thank you so much for sharing. Whether it is a cider mimosa or ghosts, keep your spirits up.